trail. Speaking of recruiting, that's where we'll go next. Carolina missed out on Zaire Williams over the weekend. He picked Stanford. What up, Gerard Haas, getting a big-time commit to go play for him out in Palo Alto. And as usual, the Tar Heel Twitter fan base kind of got uneasy that we missed out on a recruit on a class that is simply going to be the best of the last 10 years or so. And so I guess what I want to ask you is this. Are you concerned with Carolina losing Williams? And the guy that you mentioned, the one roster spot left, is Kerwin Walton. Are you concerned that if Carolina gets neither one, and Walton will commit later this month, are you concerned about the perimeter play of next year's class? A class that includes, as we've talked about, Caleb Love, R.J. Davis, and Donovan Puff Johnson, the younger brother of former Tar Heel Cam Johnson.
No, I'm not concerned about the perimeter play from that class because I think that you've got R.J. Davis, you've got Puff Johnson, you've got Caleb Love in that class. And from what we've been told, I haven't really, I'm the guy that handles a lot of the football stuff, a lot of the football recruiting, so I don't watch the tape, but from what I've been told, Walker Kessler has a lot of really good range on him too. I'm not concerned. I would maybe still be a little concerned about the team as a whole next year having those really great shooters. I still think Puff Johnson, from everything we've been told, very similar playing style to his brother, will probably be the guy that you're going to need to come in and be that dead-eye shooter. It's just, can the guys around him become better? Can guys like Leaky Black become better shooters? Can guys like Andrew Platek, maybe he finally becomes the three-point shooter that he was in high school or even half of that? That's where the concern lies if you don't land Kerwin Walton. Now, here's the deal with Kerwin Walton. They pretty much seems like all but locked up at this point. Unless something major changes, pretty much the reason that Kerwin Walton was waiting to make his decision was he was basically holding out hope that Carolina would get a free scholarship. It ends up being freed up with Brandon Huffman. And from everything that I'm hearing from a lot of the people that are, around and have sources in terms of around the basketball program and really just around the athletic program in general, they're pretty much saying that barring something shocking, he's definitely going to commit to Carolina on the 25th. It shouldn't really shock anybody that they missed out on Zaire Williams because even when Carolina hadn't filled their scholarship requirements, he really was a guy that was kind of straying elsewhere. Carolina was in the back of his mind, but it always felt like he was going to be one of those guys, especially as it got later in the process, that was going to go somewhere where he was going to be the star. And I know that a lot of people are really crapping on the guy on social media for it. I think it's a good move for him. I'm going to be honest, if he would have gone anywhere, I think USC probably would have made a little more sense because I think they're a more established basketball program, but I'm not really going to get into that. For Gerard Haas, hey, congratulations. He's clearly doing something right because for you to convince a guy that in some retrospects, if you go on some of these recruiting websites, is a top 5 guy to come and play for you as opposed to going to some of these bigger schools, that's awesome. But I'm not really overly concerned about that, especially with the fact that in next year's class, I feel like the wing is going to be an area where Carolina is really going to hit hard. And if they land Kerwin Walton, this class still brings in 3 really good shooters and guys that we think are going to have success at the college level. So I'm definitely not concerned, not as much as some of these other people are, which in my mind, they're just freaking out because this is what they're used to doing over the last couple of years. This class, no matter what ends up happening, they're going to finish as a top 3 class. That is still really good and much better than where we were just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I didn't get the whole freak out mode. It'd be different if you didn't have all the talent you already had committed coming in and you missed out on this guy. That's not the case. You've got as loaded a class as you've had since you brought in Ty Lawson, Wayne Ellington, and Brandon Wright. That's how good this class is. We know how good that class was when they committed back in the middle to late 2000s. And I think you brought up a good point. Look, Carolina's got a needed 3-point shooting. They shot 30.4% this past year as a team. And you're losing Brandon Robinson and Christian Keeling, some of your better perimeter shooters. But also, you shouldn't be just relying on incoming freshman talent to make up for that void. This is an area where Andrew Platek, Leaky Black, some of those guys, they've got to become more consistent. Because we saw very much during ACC time last year where teams dared them to shoot the ball. That's as disrespectful as it can get in basketball, where a team literally is going to let you shoot because they don't trust you to make it. And if you make it, they'll live with you beating them. Those guys have got to get more better because even though these freshmen are talented, guess what? They're freshmen. And unless they're like Kobe White, they're going to have a hard time adjusting to college basketball. So I think that's where Carolina needs to be focused on. You would look at who Walton has in his final schools remaining: Creighton, Arizona, Minnesota, Georgetown, and Vanderbilt. You would understand why Carolina's presumptive favorite. You'd probably think Arizona is probably the second team in there just because of the name. And so you get the added or the additional scholarship with Huffman transferring. You missed out on Zaire Williams. This does seem like a match made in heaven. We'll find that out on April 25th. And, of course, no matter what happens, we'll have you covered on HeelToughBlog.com. Well, with that, now we'll get to what was supposed to be the primary focus of the episode whenever we talked to you last. And we are in our season review part of the podcast where we're going back and looking at individuals, players, season in a microscope. And next up happens to be Christian Keeling. And Christian is a guy that when he first committed as a transfer back in last summer, he was supposed to be a big part of the rebuilding effort for Roy Williams as he was trying to put together a roster that could once again compete to win an ACC regular season championship. And of course, that normally means you're competing to win a national championship in March. And we all know how the season played out for Carolina, and it kind of was the same way for Christian Keeling. This was a guy that when we saw him at Late Night with Roy, he looked comfortable on the floor in terms of getting the ball, getting it in spots, and being able to shoot the ball. And whatever happened between that scrimmage, which is all it was, until the first time Carolina stepped on the court, was very eye-opening because this was a guy that you would have never thought would have been playing college basketball for 4 years. He was, and I was watching the replay of the Notre Dame game the other day, and it was evident then that he was lost. He didn't look confident. He didn't look like he belonged on the court. And I've made that comment, I believe it was after the Georgia Tech game, where I deemed that he wasn't worthy of playing for the university. And at the time, I was probably justified in saying so. A guy that scored over 1,600 points at Charleston Southern took him to December 18th before he scored in double figures for the first time. That was well over a month into the season, but was a guy that when Carolina was playing great basketball towards the end of the year was a big part of that. So a lot like the team, Keeling had an uneven year himself.
Well, I mean, look, we knew that was a risk when we went through the transfer market and got a guy that had never played at the Power 5 level. He never played power conference basketball. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people have to sort of realize with this is that this was the first time that Carolina had really experimented with this. And a lot of people wanted to say, well, we tried this with Cam Johnson and it worked. Well, Cam Johnson played at Pittsburgh. Cam Johnson played in the ACC. And also, Cam Johnson was just a different type of guy. He was a guy that he had a lot of talent. It just wasn't being utilized right at Pittsburgh under Kevin Stallings, who might be the worst head coach in Power 5 basketball history because, frankly, he's just trash. But, I mean, I just, with him, I think the expectations, kind of like a lot of the guys on this team, we talked about it a lot with Cole Anthony, but with him, I think the expectations were just sky high. We thought that we were going to get a guy that would come in. We knew, first game he comes out and starts. We're thinking, okay, we're going to get a guy that's going to come in here. He might be the second leading scorer on this team because we didn't know that Garrison Brooks was going to turn into the type of player that he was. We thought Cole Anthony, and then who else was going to step up? We looked at this guy that had gotten it done at Charleston Southern. But I mean, I think it just wasn't a great fit for him, especially early in the year. I think once he got comfortable towards the middle part of conference play and sort of settled in, you could see some of the things that we thought we were going to get from him. And I kind of made the comment, and I still stick to it today, even though, towards the end of the year, the last couple of games really didn't play all that great. I kind of wish we had another year of him, because I think that if he came back this year, he would be a guy that could contribute and have a role off the bench that Carolina could really use, a veteran presence that, even though, he hadn't been around Carolina for as many years as some of the other veterans, he's a guy that's been there, done that, would have been in the system, and would be a guy that I think could help you get 7-8 points consistently off the bench. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. He ends up graduating, but it's kind of hard to be extremely critical of him when you look at his numbers, and out of everybody on this team, he was pretty much your best bench player. Now, you can say that's because of injuries, everything like that, but I mean, honestly, there are so many other guys on this team that struggled even worse than him that you can't really kind of focus all your energy on him. He didn't have the year that we were expecting, but nobody did. So, I think you're right. His struggles are pretty much just, it pretty much is a mask of everything that this team struggled with this season. He was a guy that came in and could shoot, could knock down shots, and when it came to consistency, just like the rest of the team, there really was none. So he'll move on. He's a guy that will probably be forgotten in a lot of people's minds, but is a guy that, if he had another year, I think would have probably contributed a lot more this next year.
I forgot whenever I was writing the article about his season. He only started at the beginning of the year because Brandon Robinson had gotten injured in a scrimmage. And I think that was where it probably all went downhill for him, was because he knew after that point he had to start, whereas up until then he wasn't going to be a starter, presumptively. He was going to be your first guy off the bench, and that all changed when Brandon Robinson went out. And I think that just put him in a different state of mind because there was pressure to produce. And he wasn't ready to produce just yet because he didn't fully grasp how to play in Carolina's offense. Because once he figured out how to play, he scored double figures in 6 of the 9 games in February and looked like the guy we thought we were going to get. And this was just a month after being basically benched for the majority of games, especially the most notable the Virginia Tech game, where that game went into double overtime and he was on the floor for 9 minutes. That was the most evident where he had lost the trust of his teammates and, most importantly, the coaching staff. And you brought up the comment about wishing he had another year to come back. I had come around to the idea that if the NCAA granted seniors the ability to come back and play again after having canceled many conference tournaments and then, of course, the NCAA tournament, I think Brandon Robinson would have maybe been the no-brainer choice. I think Keeling would have been a better fit moving forward because his offensive game was a little bit more diversive. I know Brandon Robinson graded out as the best defender for the team. I think Keeling could be a very good defender as well. And so I'm with you. I think if he would have had a second year like Cam Johnson, I don't think he puts up Cam Johnson-esque numbers, but would have been more the player that we thought we were going to get when he first transferred in, as opposed to what we had to wait for really 2/3 of the season to kind of see the kind of player that Charleston Southern had for 3 years. I mean, with that, his season stats, he still scored 6.4 points per game, 43% from the field, not great, not bad, 32% from 3, 75% from the foul line, was still good enough to earn our 6th man of the year, albeit at times wasn't really speaking a whole lot because our bench really struggled amid all the injuries. But you made the comment he'll be a forgotten Tar Heel. Maybe so, because this will be a forgotten season, hopefully, when we were talking about Carolina basketball 10 years from now. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and shut down what's been a very loaded episode of the podcast. And before we're going to let you go, I'm going to let Anthony talk to you about the Heel Tough blog website.
Well, yeah, the website is packed with a lot of stuff right now, believe it or not, because, I mean, look, we're, especially in football and in basketball on the recruiting trail, things are starting to heat up.